All right, so ever wish you could just like download fluency?
Yeah.
Today's deep dive might just be the cheat code you've been looking for.
Okay.
We're diving into an episode of Learn English with Podcast Conversations, and trust me, this is like getting a backstage pass to how they make language learning so addictive.
What's interesting is how this podcast zeroes in on something that many language learners overlook: the power of listening.
Yeah.
We tend to get caught up in like speaking and grammar rules.
Right.
But listening, that's where the magic really starts.
Totally.
Yeah.
They argue that listening isn't just about understanding words. It's about training your brain to decode the music of the language.
Right.
The rhythm, the intonation, the way native speakers naturally flow from one phrase to the next.
And what's fascinating is that this exposure to authentic speech patterns can actually help you internalize grammar rules more intuitively. It's like your brain starts picking up on the patterns and structures without you even realizing it.
It's like learning to dance by watching, right?
Exactly.
You absorb the steps and the rhythm just by observing.
Exactly. And then there's the vocabulary boost you get from listening.
Yeah.
It's not just about memorizing lists. It's about encountering new words in context.
Right.
Which helps you grasp their meaning more deeply and remember them more easily.
They make a great point about how this organic vocabulary acquisition is way more effective than just cramming flashcards. It's about building a rich tapestry of words and phrases that you can actually use in real-life conversations.
And speaking of real-life conversations, the podcast gives a pretty interesting tip.
Okay.
Don't sweat the small stuff. In other words, don't get hung up on every single word you don't understand.
Right.
Focus on the overall meaning.
I get that it's like reading a book and not stopping to look up every word.
Yeah.
But isn't there a time when focusing on details important?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
I think it depends on the context. If you're listening for pleasure, sure, go with the flow and focus on the gist.
Right.
But if you're listening to a lecture or a technical presentation, you might need to pay closer attention to specific terms and concepts.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
It's about being strategic with your listening.
Right.
Knowing when to zoom in and when to zoom out.
Exactly. Now, to give you a taste of this in action, the podcast dives into a sample conversation, a casual chat between two friends making weekend plans.
I noticed that it's not a formal dialogue. It's the kind of everyday chatter you might hear at a coffee shop. Do you think that's deliberate on the podcast's part?
Absolutely. It's about exposing learners to natural, authentic language.
Right.
The kind of English they'd encounter in real-world situations.
And I think there's something to be said for the simplicity of the language they use.
Yeah.
It's not filled with jargon or complex grammar structures.
Right.
It's just clear, concise, and easy to follow.
And yet, within that simplicity, there are still valuable nuggets for learners. Like how they use phrases like, how's it going? And not bad to start the conversation.
Yeah.
These are simple greetings, but they're essential for navigating everyday interactions.
That's a good point. It's not just about learning vocabulary. It's about learning how to use those words and phrases in a natural conversational way.
Right. And then there's the phrase, I'm in, when one friend agrees to go hiking. It's such a simple expression, but it conveys enthusiasm and willingness, which are key elements of social interaction.
Okay, so we've got the casual vibe and the everyday phrases. What else makes this conversation effective for language learning?
I think it's the back and forth flow. The natural give and take of a real conversation.
Okay.
You hear interruptions, hesitations, even a little bit of slang thrown in, all those elements that make spoken language so dynamic and engaging.
And that dynamism is something you don't always get from textbooks or formal language lessons.
Yeah.
It's about capturing the spirit of communication, the way language is used in real life.
Exactly. Now, the podcast doesn't just leave you hanging with this conversation.
Right.
It actually breaks down some of those key phrases we just mentioned, like, how's it going? Not bad. And I'm in.
Okay.
Explaining their meaning and how they're used in different contexts.
Which is really helpful.
Great.
Especially for learners who might not be familiar with the nuances of those phrases.
Yeah.
It's like they're providing a mini dictionary built right into the conversation.
It's all about reinforcing what the listener has just heard and helping them solidify their understanding. It's like saying, hey, here are those conversational gems you just encountered.
Right.
Let's polish them up and add them to your linguistic toolkit.
And speaking of toolkits, the podcast doesn't stop at vocabulary and phrases. They also give you practical techniques for practicing and improving your listening skills.
Now, here's where they really get into the nitty-gritty of active learning. They emphasize techniques that go beyond passive listening.
Right.
And really engage your brain in the process.
Okay, I'm intrigued. Tell me more about these active learning techniques.
Okay.
What are they suggesting?
Well, they kick things off with a technique that sounds simple, but is actually quite powerful.
Okay.
Repetition.
Okay.
They encourage listeners to repeat phrases and sentences after the speaker.
Okay.
Focusing on mimicking not just the words, but also the pronunciation and intonation.
It's almost like a vocal workout.
Exactly.
Training your mouth and your brain to produce the sounds of English more naturally.
Yeah.
And the beauty of repetition is that you can do it anywhere, anytime.
Right.
You know, I've heard of language learners using this technique while they're driving or doing chores around the house.
Yeah.
It's like sneaking in a language lesson without even realizing it.
Exactly. And then they introduce a technique called shadowing.
Okay.
Which takes repetition to the next level. Imagine trying to sync your voice with the speakers, almost like you're their shadow.
So it's not just about repeating after the speaker.
Right.
It's about keeping pace with them in real time.
Yeah.
That sounds challenging.
It can be, especially at first.
Yeah.
But the payoff is huge.
Yeah.
Neuroscientists have found that shadowing can actually rewire your brain.
Wow.
To process language more efficiently. It's like creating new pathways for the sounds and rhythms of English to flow through.
I'm starting to see why they call these active learning techniques. They're not just about passively absorbing information.
Right.
They're about actively engaging your brain and your body in the process.
And that active engagement is key for making the learning stick.
Right.
Now, another technique they highlight is note-taking.
Okay.
Which might seem a bit old school in the digital age.
Yeah.
But there's a reason it stood the test of time.
Well, I have to admit, I'm a bit of a note-taking fanatic myself.
Okay.
I find that the act of writing things down helps me remember them better. But I can see how note-taking while listening to a podcast could be tricky.
Right.
You don't want to miss anything important while you're scribbling away.
You've hit on a common challenge.
Yeah.
The fear of pausing the podcast and losing the flow.
Right.
But here's the thing.
Okay.
Pausing is actually your friend. It gives you a chance to catch your breath.
Okay.
Process what you've just heard.
Right.
And jot down those key phrases or vocabulary words that you want to remember.
That's a good point. It's not about trying to transcribe the entire podcast.
Right.
It's about selectively capturing the nuggets that resonate with you.
Exactly. And there are different ways to approach note-taking.
Yeah.
Some people prefer to jot down key words or phrases.
Okay.
While others like to summarize main points in their own words.
Right.
The key is to find a system that works for you.
Yeah.
And helps you make sense of the information.
I think it's interesting how they connect note-taking back to that earlier tip about not sweating the small stuff. By taking notes, you're naturally forced to prioritize information.
Right.
To decide what's essential and what can be skimmed over.
That's a really insightful connection.
Yeah.
Note-taking isn't just about memorization.
Right.
It's about actively processing information, filtering it through your own lens, and making it your own.
It's like turning passive listening into active learning, engaging your brain in a deeper way.
And that deeper engagement is what ultimately leads to greater understanding and retention.
Okay.
Now, before we wrap up this exploration of learning techniques, there's one more crucial point the podcast emphasizes, the power of consistency.
Ah, yes. The idea that even short bursts of listening can make a big difference over time.
Absolutely.
I think this is really encouraging.
Yeah.
Especially for people who feel like they don't have a lot of free time to dedicate to language learning.
The podcast stresses that you don't need to block out hours each day to listen to podcasts. Even just 10 or 15 minutes a day done consistently can yield significant results. It's about weaving those short bursts of listening into your daily routine.
It's like the saying goes, little drops of water make a mighty ocean.
Right.
Consistent effort, no matter how small, can lead to remarkable progress over time.
And you know, this principle of consistency applies not just to language learning, but to any skill or habit you're trying to develop.
Yeah.
Whether you're learning to play an instrument, write code, or even just meditate, it's the consistency that makes all the difference.
It's about building momentum, creating a positive feedback loop where each small success motivates you to keep going.
Exactly. And the beautiful thing about consistency is that it compounds over time.
Yeah.
Those small efforts add up, creating a ripple effect that can transform your skills in your life.
Now, as we shift gears to think about how you, the listener, can put all this into practice, I want to highlight something the podcast touches on.
Okay.
The importance of finding podcasts that you genuinely enjoy.
That's such a crucial point.
Yeah.
Language learning shouldn't feel like a chore.
Right.
It should be a journey of discovery, a way to connect with your passions and interests.
If you're not enjoying the content, you're less likely to stick with it.
Right.
It's about finding podcasts that spark your curiosity, make you laugh, or challenge your perspectives.
And the good news is, there's a podcast out there for everyone.
Right.
Whether you're into true crime history, pop culture, or anything in between.
Yeah.
You're bound to find podcasts that align with your interests and keep you engaged.
I think that's a great reminder that language learning doesn't have to be confined to textbooks and classrooms. It can be integrated into your hobbies, your interests, your everyday life.
It's about making language learning a natural and enjoyable part of who you are.
Right.
Now, as we move into our final thoughts and takeaways, I want to touch on a point that the podcast doesn't explicitly address, but that I think is incredibly important. The power of mindset.
Oh, I love this book. Mindset is everything, isn't it?
It is.
It's about believing in your ability to learn and grow, even when it feels challenging.
Exactly. It's about embracing the journey.
Right.
Knowing that there will be bumps along the way,
Yeah.
but that those bumps are all part of the learning process.
And it's about celebrating those small victories.
Uh-huh.
Those moments when you finally understand a tricky grammar concept.
Yes.
Or can hold a conversation without feeling flustered.
Those victories, no matter how small, fuel your motivation and keep you moving forward.
Right.
It's about recognizing that language learning, like any skill, is a marathon, not a sprint.
And like any marathon,
Yeah.
it requires patience, persistence, and a belief in yourself.
Now, as we wrap up this deep dive,
Okay.
I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
All right.
What are some creative ways that you can incorporate listening into your learning routine?
Ooh, that's a great question. We've talked about podcasts.
Right.
But what about audiobooks, music movies, even just eavesdropping on conversations in a cafe?
The possibilities are endless. It's about opening your ears to the world around you and finding opportunities to engage with the language in a way that feels authentic and enjoyable.
Yeah. You know, it's funny. We started this deep dive talking about how podcasts can be a secret weapon for language learning.
Uh-huh.
But now it feels like we've uncovered a whole arsenal of strategies and techniques.
It's like we've cracked the code, not just for learning English through podcasts, but for approaching language learning in a more holistic and engaging way.
And I think the beauty of it is that so many of these strategies, active listening, prioritizing information, consistent practice, cultivating a growth mindset, they're not just limited to language learning.
Right.
They can be applied to any area of life where you want to expand your knowledge in schools.
Absolutely. These are principles for lifelong learning.
Right.
For becoming a more curious, engaged, and adaptable individual.
And isn't that what it's all about?
Yeah.
The joy of discovery, the thrill of challenging yourself, the satisfaction of seeing yourself grow and evolve over time.
It's about embracing the journey of learning, knowing that there's always something new to discover, a new perspective, to gain a new skill to master.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final challenge, a call to action, if you will.
Pick one of the strategies we've discussed. Maybe it's shadowing, maybe it's note-taking, maybe it's simply committing to listening to an English language podcast for 10 minutes a day.
Yeah, and put it into practice. See how it feels, observe the results, and most importantly, embrace the journey.
Remember, learning a language is not about perfection.
Right.
It's about progress, about pushing yourself beyond your comfort zone.
Yeah.
And about discovering the incredible capacity of your own mind to learn and grow.
We're confident that with the right strategies and the right mindset, you can achieve your language learning goals and unlock a whole new world of possibilities.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. Happy learning.